The war had changed everything. After the death of Ned Stark, the North had crowned Robb Stark as king in the North. His bannermen stood behind him, loyal, fierce, and full of rage against the Lannisters. But Robb knew winning battles wasn't enough. If he wanted to break the Lannisters' power, he needed to strike where it would hurt the most. Casterly Rock. No one had ever dared to attack Casterly Rock. It was the seat of House Lannister, guarded heavily, sitting on gold mines and pride. But Robb wasn't like the others. He wasn't after just revenge. Now he wanted to crush their name, their wealth, and their arrogance. The plan came from a quiet council in the north. Lord Blackwood had once served near the Westerlands and remembered secret passages from the coast. Robb listened carefully. His eyes, cold and sharp, met the map in front of him. The coastline near the western cliffs held caves that smugglers once used. They could sneak in quietly, while the main Lannister forces focused on King's Landing or River Run. If they took Casterly Rock, even Tywin Lannister would feel fear. "Your Grace," said Great John Umber, laughing, "you've got wolf's teeth sharper than most lions." Others laughed, but Robb didn't. His eyes were steady. "We don't do this to impress anyone. We do it to end a war." Robb didn't tell all his lords. Only a chosen few knew. The rest believed he was heading south toward King's Landing. He left Roose Bolton in charge of the main host, while he took a force of 2,000 silent, loyal men who would die for the North without question. Among them rode Grey Wind, silent and watchful, and beside Robb rode Catelyn Stark. She begged him to reconsider, fearing he was risking too much. But Robb only kissed her forehead and said, "If we don't take this chance, we will fight for 10 more years. I want peace, Mother, but I know it must be earned with fire." The journey was hard. Cold winds blew from the sea. They hid in forests, traveled by night, avoided the roads. Every step felt like walking toward a dream or a grave. When they reached the coast near the rock, the men grew quiet. Before them rose cliffs like sharp teeth, dark and ancient. The sea crashed below. They found the caves Lord Blackwood had spoken of, half collapsed but still real. Robb ordered silence. They lit no torches. They moved like shadows. It took them hours to reach the inside. The path was narrow, slippery, and silent. Every footstep echoed like a scream. They climbed, crawled, and finally reached the lower halls of Casterly Rock. What they found was gold. Yes, but not only that. Lannister guards were there, but few in number. They never expected an attack from within. The northern men, blades drawn, fell upon them with silent fury. Robb led the charge. Grey Wind tore through armor. Steel met flesh. Blood was spilled, but the rock shook. The alarm was raised too late. By morning, the red banners of the Lion had fallen from the towers, and in their place flew the dire wolf of the north. Robb Stark had taken Casterly Rock. He stood at the highest tower, staring down at the land that had never known defeat. Below him, his men cheered, but he did not smile. He thought of his father, of Winterfell, of every Stark that had died in the name of honor. And in that silence, Robb Stark made a promise to himself. This war would not end until every Lannister sin was answered. News of Casterly Rock's fall spread like wildfire across the Seven Kingdoms. Lords whispered it in their halls. Small folk repeated it in shocked gasps. And in King's Landing, Queen Cersei shattered a goblet against the wall the moment she heard. "They took her home," she hissed, pacing madly. "Robb Stark sits where Tywin Lannister once ruled." Her brother Tyrion, watching from the side, raised an eyebrow. "Not just sits, sister, he conquered it, with only 2,000 men." "Clever boy." Cersei's face twisted with rage. "He's a boy who stole what belongs to Lion. He'll bleed for it." But the truth was harder than her pride. Tywin Lannister, the Lion of the Rock, was still commanding armies near Harrenhal, too far to return quickly, and without Casterly Rock, their gold supply had been cut. The Iron Bank of Braavos, already impatient with the crown's debts, sent cold letters demanding payment. Robb Stark didn't just win a battle, he'd struck at the Lannisters' heart, both in power and coin. Back in the Rock, things were far from peaceful. The Lannisters who survived were locked in cells. Their gold sat untouched for now. Robb didn't take it as spoils. He said it belonged to the people who'd suffered. But among his men, not all agreed. Lord Casterly, grim and silent, approached Robb during the second night. "You sit on lion's bones, boy," he said, blunt as ever. "This place is cursed with blood. You should burn it." Robb didn't flinch. "Burning it won't bring my father back. But holding it, that changes the game." Casterly spat. "You think Tywin will let this go? You think you can keep this place?" "I don't intend to," Robb said, surprising him. "We'll take what we need, and then we'll make sure it can never be used to feed war again." That night, Robb met with Lord Blackwood, Mage Mormont, and a few trusted others. He had a new plan, something bold, something dangerous. "We can't hold the Rock forever," Robb admitted. "We're surrounded by enemies. But we can destroy what gives the Lannisters power, their mind, their wealth." Lord Blackwood's eyes widened. "You want to collapse the mines? Flood them," Robb replied. "Seal them. Make sure no lion ever digs gold from this place again." It was madness, but the kind that made sense in war. That week, his men began work. Engineers, miners, and warriors used old passages to bring seawater deep into the tunnels. The mines, once full of gold and glory, started to drown in salt and darkness. Meanwhile, raven messages flew across Westeros. Some praised Robb as a warrior king who had done the unthinkable. Others called him a savage, a barbarian who destroyed beauty and legacy. But worst of all, in the Westerlands, noble houses began to waver. Some questioned if the Lannisters were truly untouchable. A few even sent secret offers to Robb, asking for terms to switch sides. In King's Landing, this cracked the foundation of fear Tywin had built for decades. When Tywin finally returned from Harrenhal with his army, he found not just a captured castle, but a broken kingdom. Casterly Rock stood, yes, but its pride had been shattered. The mines were flooded. Its gold was gone. And Robb Stark, the Wolf King, had vanished with his army before Tywin could strike. He'd left behind only the northern banner and a message carved into the throne room wall. "A crown built on blood and gold cannot last. Robb Stark." Tywin's face turned to stone as he read it. "This boy plays war like a game," he said coldly. "He forgets wolves can be hunted." But in truth, the fear had begun to creep into even Tywin's heart, because Robb Stark wasn't just winning battles, he was rewriting the rules of war. And far to the east, Daenerys Targaryen, hearing of the young wolf's boldness, paused from her own path of conquest. She smiled just slightly and said, "Westeros is waking up." Robb Stark didn't rest after leaving Casterly Rock. He rode with his men through mountain paths and river trails, avoiding open roads. Every move was planned with precision. He didn't want glory, he wanted results. He knew Tywin Lannister would come for him with fury, unlike anything the war had seen so far. But Robb had already begun to change. He was no longer the young boy who rode south after his father's death. The fall of Casterly Rock had hardened him, not just in battle, but in strategy. He now understood something his enemies had overlooked. Fear was more powerful than swords. As his army moved east, Robb began sending letters, not to allies but to enemies. One letter went to House Rayne's last living cousin, hiding in exile. Another to a minor house in the Westerlands, long crushed by Lannister rule. And another, most dangerous of all, to Dawn. "We struck the lion in its den," the letter read. "Now we ask the scorpion, will it sting or sleep while lions rule?" At the same time, Catelyn Stark begged him to return home. Winterfell had been taken and burned by Theon Greyjoy. Bran and Rickon were believed dead. The North had bled while Robb rode in the South. Her voice trembled with grief. "You fight wars in the West, but your home lies in ashes. Robb looked away when she said that. Guilt ran deep in his bones. But he knew something else, too. If he returned now with nothing more than empty hands, the North would still be hunted. His enemies would never stop. But if he returned with new alliances, if he returned not just as a king but as a force that changed Westeros, that was how he'd bring peace. So he sent men north in secret trusted scouts to find the truth about Bran and Rickon, and to report on the Boltons, now growing too bold in the north. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister was preparing to retaliate. He ordered the Riverlands burn, hoping to draw Robb into battle. Villages were sacked. Innocents were slain. Jaime Lannister, freshly released from captivity, was recalled and given command. Tywin's orders were simple: bring me the wolf's head. But Jaime, despite his arrogance, wasn't blind. He saw what Robb had done and knew they were no longer fighting a northern boy. They were fighting a king who understood the cost of war and didn't fear it. He's not making mistakes, Jaime told Cersei. He's making statements. Cersei sneered. He's spreading chaos. He's spreading doubt, Jaime corrected. And doubt kills kingdoms. In the Vale, Robb's actions caught another set of eyes. Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, always scheming, saw opportunity. He whispered poison in the ears of young Robin Arryn, suggesting the Vale might rise under a new banner, but Robb knew better than to trust snakes. When Baelish sent a proposal for an alliance, Robb replied with just one sentence: "I don't make deals with men who sell lies for coin." Instead, Robb turned to someone more unexpected: Gendry, the blacksmith's apprentice who'd once followed Arya across the Riverlands. Rumors had spread of Gendry's blood, that he was Robert Baratheon's bastard. Robb had him found, brought to camp, and offered him something no one had before: recognition. "You don't owe me loyalty," Robb said. "But if we're to break the wheel, I need men who fight for more than just houses and names." Gendry, after a long silence, nodded. "Then give me a hammer." Together they began forging a new plan, not just to defeat the Lannisters, but to reshape what followed. Robb spoke to the men around his fire like a general, but also like a brother. No more kings who burn villages to win crowns. No more children slaughtered in the dark. We will show them the North remembers, but we'll also show them what justice really looks like. As snow began to fall in the west, word reached Robb through a raven that would change everything. Stannis Baratheon was marching north to Winterfell, and behind him came a girl with silver hair and dragons, whispering of fire and blood. The game had changed. The storm and the dragon were rising, and Robb Stark, now more wolf than man, was ready to meet them. The cold wind that blew from the north now carried more than just snow. It carried the promise of reckoning. Robb Stark stood over a map, the ink barely dry on reports from his scouts. Stannis Baratheon had indeed reached the north, gathering what few northern lords had not bent the knee to the Boltons, and somewhere beyond him, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen had begun to stir. Dragons were no longer myths. They were flying, burning, conquering. The world was shifting, thrones were cracking, but Robb's heart wasn't in the south anymore. His thoughts had returned home to Winterfell, to the memory of his brothers, and to the flames that had consumed it under Theon's betrayal. He gathered his closest men in a quiet tent, lit only by a single candle. Great John Umber, Lord Blackwood, Mage Mormont, and a few others still loyal through blood and war. His face was pale with cold and resolve. "We've burned the lion's gold," Robb said, "but it's not enough. The Boltons wear the North's crown now. They skin their enemies and call it justice. If we let that stand, then every man who died for me died for nothing." Umber growled. "Let's take Winterfell then. Cut Roose Bolton's throat and hang his bastard boy from the gates." But Robb shook his head slowly. "Not yet. We don't rush into wolves' jaws. We fight with more than steel. Now we fight with truth." The northern lords, even those sworn to the Boltons, were growing uneasy. Word had spread of the Red Wedding, of how Robb's wife and unborn child were butchered by Walder Frey under Bolton's orders, and now rumors whispered that Roose Bolton had begun using flayed man banners openly again, frightening even his own bannermen. Robb saw a weakness and meant to crack it wide open. He began sending letters north by raven and by trusted messengers, but they weren't filled with threats or promises of gold. They told the truth of the Red Wedding, of how Roose Bolton betrayed the North to curry favor with the Lannisters, of how Walder Frey slit the throat of Catelyn Stark while men drank wine and sang false songs of peace. And in every letter, Robb wrote one line at the end: "The North remembers." Within weeks, strange things began happening in the North. Small folk loyal to House Stark started ambushing Bolton's supply wagons in the woods. Old lords who had once sworn to rob like House Serwyn and House Torhart quietly gathered their strength again. Even some within House Manderley began whispering rebellion, waiting for the right moment. And all the while, Roose Bolton sat in Winterfell, sensing that something was shifting around him, but not knowing where the blow would come from. Then, one night, a message arrived to Robb by Raven. "Bran is alive." He was seen beyond the wall, walking with strange men. Robb sat alone with the letter for a long time. He didn't tell his men, not yet. If Bran truly lived, it changed everything. A Stark heir with mysterious powers, touched by the old gods, returning from the land of the dead, that would make even the most doubtful northern heart remember their loyalty. But joy didn't come easily to Robb anymore. Not since the Red Wedding, not since he buried his wife with his own hands. Instead of celebrating, he called for Gendry and Lord Blackwood. "It's time," he said. "We strike the Dreadfort, the seat of House Bolton, the home of flayed skins and cold hearts, the one place where northern honor had gone to die." But Robb didn't plan to take it by siege. "We won't storm the gates," he said. "We'll go under them." The old tunnels from the days of the first men still ran beneath the castle. Most had collapsed, but some, according to old maps and whispers, remained. Robb's war had begun in whispers, and now it would end in silence, too deep in the dark, beneath the home of the Boltons. As his men prepared for the long march north, Robb stood before his banner torn from the walls of Casterly Rock, stained by war and blood. He touched the direwolf's face with his hand. "Wait for me, Winterfell," he whispered. "I'm coming home." Snow fell like ash across the north as Robb Stark's army moved closer to the Dreadfort. They came in silence, wrapped in furs and shadows. No horns, no banners, only quiet men with sharp eyes and sharper blades. Robb had split his forces into three. One would surround the Dreadfort from a distance, cutting off escape. The second would wait in the woods, hidden and ready to charge. And the third, his chosen few, would go beneath. The tunnels were old, forgotten, cracked, and smelling of rot. Only known to a few who remembered the days when the first men built hidden roads through the earth. Robb rode with 20 men, among them Gendry, Lord Blackwood's best scouts, and 2 brothers from House Reed, small, quick, and fearless. As they crawled through the darkness, the cold became unbearable. The air turned wet and thick, and every sound felt too loud. Even Grey Wind, who padded behind Robb silently, made no noise. When they emerged beneath the Dreadfort, it was in the old crypt tombs that hadn't been visited in generations. Stone coffins lined the walls, and above them the Boltons feasted. Robb could hear the music, faint but mocking, the same tune that had played at the Red Wedding. Rage flared in his chest, but he kept it buried. This time, he would not be led by emotion. This time, he would not be led by emotion. This time, he would be the storm. They moved quickly, silently, rising through servant paths and unused stairwells. The Dreadfort was colder than any castle Robb had ever known. Even the walls seemed to bleed chill. In the great hall, Roose Bolton sat with his son, Ramsay. They drank and laughed, never expecting a wolf to walk among them again, until the doors slammed open, and Robb Stark stood there, eyes burning, grey wind at his side. The hall froze. For a moment, no one moved. Ramsay dropped his goblet. Roose stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "You're dead," he said. "We killed you at the Twins." Robb stepped forward, his voice calm. "You tried, but wolves don't die in cages." Then chaos exploded. Gendry threw a hammer straight into a guard's chest. Grey wind lunged, tearing through the hall. Northern men stormed from hidden passages, blades flashing. The Second Army, hidden outside, burst through the main gates. Screams echoed through the main gates. Screams echoed through the Dreadfort. Flames lit the walls, and in the center of it all stood Robb, blade in hand, moving like a man with nothing left to lose. He found Roose Bolton near the dais, sword drawn, calm even in battle. The two circled each other, betrayer and betrayed. "You broke guest right," Robb said, voice steady. "You murdered my mother." Roose's lips curled slightly. "She was weak, like you." Robb struck first. Steel clashed in a storm of sparks. Rose was older but quick-experienced, but Robb fought with a fire born of ghosts. Every swing, every strike carried the weight of Winterfell, the North, and every Stark buried in the snow. In the end, Robb disarmed him. He drove his sword through Roose's heart without a word. Ramsay tried to flee, but Grey Wind was faster. By dawn, the Dreadfort burned, and the banners that flew were no longer the flayed man, but the direwolf of House Stark. The news reached Winterfell before Robb arrived. Sellswords hired by the Boltons abandoned the castle and ran. The people, broken and scared, watched the horizon, and then they saw him riding through the snow, armor dented, eyes heavy, but alive. When Robb entered Winterfell, no horns were blown, no songs were sung. The people simply dropped to their knees. They whispered, "The king in the north," but Robb didn't raise his sword or his voice. He walked through the burned gates of his childhood home like a man carrying 1,000 memories on his shoulders. In the Godgewood, where snow covered the old red tree, Robb knelt, and for the first time in years he wept. Winterfell was his again. But peace was still far away, because south of the Neck, Cersei Lannister had declared herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and far across the sea, 3 dragons soared in the sky. The war was not over, but the North had risen. Winterfell stood once again under the Stark banner, but its walls whispered with ghosts. Robb walked through the broken corridors where he'd played as a boy, where his father had once ruled with quiet strength. The halls echoed with silence. No laughter, no footsteps of little brothers running down stone steps. Only the cold remained. Rebuilding had begun. Lords from all corners of the North arrived one by one, many with their heads bowed low in shame for bending the knee to Roose Bolton. Robb greeted them without anger, but without warmth either. Forgiveness was not something he gave freely anymore, not after what had been done in the name of survival. Lord Manderley of White Harbour came with 300 men and a chest of coin. "For justice," he said, "for your mother, and for the wolf blood in all of us." Maege Mormont stood tall and fierce beside her small but deadly warriors. "The North remembers," she said, her voice like thunder. "And we are done bowing to Southern Nibe." But there were still threats in the shadows. The Freys held the twins, fat and arrogant, behind their crumbling towers, and word had roared that the Lannisters were bleeding yet still alive. Queen Cersei sat the throne, surrounded by fear and fire, and worse still, the dead had begun to move. Whispers came from beyond the wall, not just of wildlings, but of white shadows in the snow, of blue-eyed corpses walking through frozen forests. Maesters dismissed the rumors, but Robb knew better than to ignore old tales. The North had always believed in the cold things of night. He sent ravens to Castle Black, demanding truth. What came back chilled him more than the wind. The Night's Watch stands alone. Winter is no longer coming. It is here." But the South laughed at the North's fears. Cersei Lannister's grip on the throne was slipping, yet she refused to let go. She filled King's Landing with gold cloaks and lies. She called Robb a usurper, a ghost who wore a stolen crown. She declared him outlaw and offered 10,000 gold dragons for his head. Robb didn't answer with words. He answered with action. He sent Lord Umber and Gendry south with 500 riders. Their task, strike fear, not battle. They burned supply lines meant for the Lannister armies. They raided caravans carrying food to the crown. And in every village they passed, they left behind a banner pinned to the walls. "The wolf lives." Meanwhile, ravens reached Daenerys Targaryen in Meereen. Her council debated the North's rising king. "A northern boy who dares to fight fire with ice," Ser Jorah said. "He took Casterly Rock," Missandei reminded them, "with only 2,000 men." Tyrion Lannister, once hand to her father's killers, stared at the raven's words with a strange look in his eye. "Robb Stark," he murmured. "I once knew him, honorable. But this is something new." Daenerys looked out over her dragons, flying high above Meereen's towers. "Let the wolf howl," she said, "but when I land in Westeros, he must choose fire or frost." Back in Winterfell, Robb was preparing for something far greater than another war. He had begun gathering dragonglass, remembering old stories passed down from the Crenofmen and the Night's Watch. He listened to the whispers of old men and wildlings. He met secretly with a man dressed in black who had once died and returned, Jon Snow. Their meeting was brief but powerful. Jon told Robb what he'd seen beyond the wall. The White Walkers, the dead, the Night King. "This fight isn't about thrones anymore," Jon said. "It's about survival." Robb looked into the fire that night and felt the truth settle in his bone. He had taken Casterly Rock, burned the Dreadfort, reclaimed Winterfell, but none of it would matter if death swept across the land. He rose from the firelight and addressed his lords. "We are done playing their games. The Lannisters want crowns, the Targaryens want conquest. Let them fight. We'll fight for the living." The North would no longer fight for vengeance or titles, it would fight for life, and in the darkness beyond the wall, something ancient opened its icy eyes. The real war had finally begun. The night was colder than any Robb Stark had known. Snow fell like feathers from a dying sky, and the wind howled through Winterfell's towers like wolves crying for the dead. But it wasn't the cold that troubled him. It was the silence. Jon Snow had ridden back to the wall, leaving behind words that weighed heavier than steel. The enemy was no longer the Lannisters, the Boltons, or the Freys. It was death itself. An enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be bought, could not be betrayed. Robb had faced armies. He had seen blood and fire. But nothing in his heart or memory prepared him for what Jon described: the Night King, the endless army of the dead, and a darkness that would sweep across the world if they failed. Still, the rest of Westeros remained blind. In King's Landing, Cersei sharpened her claws. She'd aligned with the Iron Bank, hired the Golden Company, and prepared for war not against death, but against Daenerys Targaryen, who had finally crossed the sea. The Dragon Queen had landed at Dragonstone, and the realm trembled. With her came Unsullied, Dothraki, and 3 dragons. Fire made flesh. Robb watched her rise from afar, unsure if she would be ally or enemy. Then came the Raven, an invitation, written in her own hand. "Meet me at the Trident. The world cannot afford another war of kings. Only unity will stand against what comes." Robb read the letter in silence. He remembered how his father had died, believing in honor and oaths. He remembered how trust had cost him everything at the Twins. But he also knew what was at stake. He rode to the Trident with only a small guard, no banners, no shows of force. And there, near the river where Rhaegar Targaryen had fallen and Robert Baratheon's rebellion was sealed, stood Daenerys Stormborn, She was younger than he expected, but colder in her eyes. Fire lived in her blood, but war had tempered her. They spoke alone under the falling snow. "You've shaken the South," she said, "torn down the Lannisters' pride." "I didn't do it for power," Robb replied. "I did it because someone had to." Daenerys studied him carefully. "The world is about to end, Robb Stark. If we don't unite now, there won't be anything left to rule." "I will never kneel to another crown," Robb said flatly. She nodded. "Then don't kneel. Stand beside me." It wasn't an alliance of hearts. It was one of necessity, but it was enough. Their armies began to move north. Dothraki thundered across the snowy fields. Unsullied marched in perfect silence through the white forests. Dragons flew above the wall for the first time in history, their roars shaking the sky, and behind it all, the dead marched too. At Winterfell, the old gods watched as the largest army the North had ever seen gathered under one banner, not of wolf, nor lion, nor dragon, but of flame and frost. Jon Snow returned with news that made the blood run cold in every man's veins. "The wall has fallen. Eastwatch is gone. The Night King rides a dragon." Robb's heart sank. He looked at Daenerys, whose face had turned to stone. Her dragon, Viserion, once lost beyond the wall, now served death. War had come, the final war. In the days that followed, every man trained. Even the women took up arms. Children were sent south. The forges burned day and night, turning dragon glass into blades, arrowheads, and armor. On the eve of battle, Robb stood on the walls of Winterfell. Snow coated his shoulders. Grey Wind sat beside him, still and alert. He looked at the stars. He thought of his father, his mother, his wife, and the child he never got to hold. He thought of Bran and Arya and Jon, all lost in their own ways. And he thought of the boy he used to be. "I was never meant to be a king," he whispered. Daenerys stepped beside him. "Neither was I," she said. They stood in silence as horns blew in the distance. Not war horns, warning horns. The dead had come. Their eyes burned blue in the night, and behind them, wings spread wide across the sky ice and death, flying faster than the wind. Winterfell would be the last stand, and Robb Stark would either save the realm or fall with it. The night the dead arrived at Winterfell, the stars vanished behind a veil of clouds, and the snow turned to ash. Fires were lit along the ramparts. The great horns of the north blew thrice. Once for the living, twice for allies, and the third, long and deep, for death. Robb Stark stood at the gates, armored in black steel, etched with silver wolves. Beside him stood Jon Snow, grim-faced and silent. Daenerys, cloaked in furs, watched the skies, her dragons circling above. All three had seen war, but this was something else entirely. This was the end of all things. Grey Wind snarled low, sensing what even men could not see yet, and then they came. Like a black wave under moonlight, tens of thousands of dead surged across the snow-covered plains, silent, soulless, blue eyes glowing like cold fire. And at the back, atop a dead dragon with wings of ice, rode the Night King. The first charge came from the Dothraki. Screaming into the dark, their blades of dragon glass lit the snow like a river of fire. For a moment, hope danced. Then the lights were swallowed whole, gone, silenced. Winterfell shook. "They're here," Jon muttered. Robb turned to his bannermen. "No retreat. If we fall standing. If we bleed for the living." And then chaos exploded. The dead slammed into the walls like a living storm. Arrows rained from above. Dragonfire lit the night in bursts of orange and gold. Daenerys and Drogon swept through the sky, burning hundreds with each pass. But it wasn't enough. They kept coming. Jon fought on the front lines, his sword Longclaw flashing like lightning. Robb moved beside him, Grey Wind tearing through corpses with savage fury. Gendry fought at the gate with his warhammer, crushing skulls. Arya Stark, silent as death herself, moved through shadows, taking down wights with blade and cunning. But the Night King did not move. He watched, waiting, smiling. Hours passed like heartbeats. The walls began to fall. The dead breached the courtyard. Robb's army began to break. Even dragons screamed in pain as icy spears flew from the shadows. And then it happened. The Night King dismounted and walked through fire as if it was snow. He raised his arms, and the fallen rose again. Stark men, Dothraki, unsullied, even those who had died moments before. Jon ran toward him, screaming, but a wall of wights blocked his path. Daenerys swept low with Drogon, releasing dragon fire straight onto the Night King, but he stood untouched, staring at her with dead eyes. Then Robb saw it. In the heart of Winterfell, beneath the godswood, the weirwood tree stood untouched, glowing faintly red in the darkness, and before it, Bran Stark sat, not a cripple, not a boy, but the three-eyed raven. His eyes were white, lost in visions. The Night King turned toward him. "He's going for Bran!" Robb yelled. "He wants to erase memory," Jon shouted. "Then we protect him, or none of us will matter." Robb and Arya broke through the chaos, racing toward the godswood. Wights poured in, but Arya danced between them like a shadow. Robb slashed with wild strength, cutting a path toward the red tree. But the Night King was already there. He walked slowly toward Bran, drawing his icy blade. Robb roared and lunged. The Night King turned and drove his blade into Robb's side. Pain exploded through Robb's body. He dropped to one knee, blood pouring through his armor. But he didn't fall. He looked up, teeth clenched. Then Arya leapt from behind, silent and fast. The Night King caught her, but her blade fell, not in his hand, into his chest. A dagger of Valyrian steel. The Night King's eyes widened. A crack of blue light split his chest, and then he shattered. Ice broke. His body turned to snow and was gone. And with him, the army of the dead crumbled. One by one, the wights fell. Trouble was louder than the battle. Robb collapsed beside the weirwood, bleeding heavily. Jon and Arya rushed to him. Bran opened his eyes, tears falling silently. "You held the north," Jon whispered, holding Robb's hand. "I held what mattered," Robb whispered back, voice breaking. "Not the rock," whispered back, voice breaking. "Not the rock, not the crown, just them, all of them." He looked to Arya, to Jon, to Bran. He smiled just barely, and then he was still. The king in the north died where he was born, in Winterfell, beneath the old gods. They buried him at sunrise in the crypts beneath his ancestors, and above, the north stood free, not because of banners, but because of one wolf who never stopped fighting.